You found a podcast where you'll hear the truth, and we will praise Jesus' name. We stand for the Bible and won't back down from it, although it don't bring much fame. Some folks will like it, some will try to deny it, but God's word will always stand true. It's been tried in the fire, still good in this. Hello, friends and faithful listeners. It's time for the Pod King Bible Study. I'm your co-host, Donald King, and I'm joined by the host of this study, Brother Donnie King. On this podcast, we study the Bible from its original languages so we can understand the Word of God more clearly. We look at current events and news in light of Scripture, and we also examine some of the things going on within our culture from a biblical perspective. This is Friday, February the 23rd, special edition number 122, Holy Ground. In our last episode, we rehashed the verses where Jesus told the people that they were his disciples if they continued in his word, and if they know the truth will make them free. Then we spoke of how the Jews argued that they have never been in bondage to anyone because they are children of Abraham. Jesus rebuffed them by telling them if they were children of Abraham, they wouldn't be seeking to kill him. As always, this riled the Jews greatly, and they began getting very volatile toward Christ. We believe this episode will open your eyes to some things, but you must listen to it first before that can happen. So come along with us on an exciting journey in John's Gospel. In today's study, we study the concept of holy ground. We go back to themes that are very familiar to all, but then we venture into territory a lot of people might be surprised about. In our discussion of holy ground, we talk about Naaman and his trip to see the prophet Elisha, David being driven from Israel by King Saul, Jacob at Bethel, and more. Wherever God is, that place is holy ground for as long as he is present there. Mankind has always sought to obtain holy ground, and in today's episode, we have a conversation concerning how that is made possible. You don't want to miss this stirring program today. And now for the teaching of God's Word and the lesson for today, I'll turn it to the host of this podcast, Brother Donnie King.
Well, I hope you're ready for one of the greatest studies we've undertaken in a long time.
You know, it'd probably be in order to thank everyone for tuning into the Pod King Bible Study before you begin telling them about the study, wouldn't it?
Well, it might would, but I'm excited about this week's Friday episode.
Well, I'm sure you are, but every week you act as if this is the best study yet.
Well, it should be, especially if we're striving for excellence. We should be getting better every week, every month, and every year. And you know why?
Well, I got a feeling you're going to tell me so. Why?
Because we should be striving for excellence in such a way we're growing every day as well.
Well, I can honestly say that I believe you're living proof this can actually happen.
Really? Well, that's one of the nicest things you said about me in a good while. Is it that obvious that I've been growing in the Lord?
No, I was talking about the fact that it's obvious that you're growing every day, and I figured you'd see proof of this on your scales when you weigh in.
Oh, so this is how we grow in godliness. We throw each other under the bus now. Huh. Well, I refuse to stoop to your level.
Hey, didn't you just do what you were saying you weren't going to do?
Well, maybe so. It's kind of like the woman who got mad at another sister in their church.
Oh, boy. Why'd they have to say something to remind him of a story?
Well, anyway, she was so furious about this other sister, she told her, she said, I've got a mouthful I could say about you, but I'm too good a Christian to talk like that.
Well, she could entertain those thoughts and be okay, but she felt like she would be sinning if she put it into words. I figure this is probably more common than we'd like to admit.
I'd say you're right, and even though it makes for a hilarious story, it's truly sad. Now, where were we in our conversation before I told that story anyway?
You were about to start us off with our subject matter today, right?
Oh, yeah, why do I feel like you're trying to bamboozle me for some reason?
Holy ground. That's an awesome topic to think about, much less do an episode about.
Yeah, it's truly a blessed thought, but it can become a reality for us if we so desire.
Hey, are you going to be talking about Moses and the burning bush today? I know that the Lord told him to take off his shoes because he was standing on holy ground.
Well, I might end up touching on that at some point along with a few other places, but I was planning on beginning somewhere else and working our way to some pretty amazing passages.
Okay, well, however you feel best, so where do we begin?
Well, I want to make a statement and then build from this. We as Americans are very different from the Jews.
Oh, wow. I'm glad you noticed this, Captain Obvious.
It's going to be one of those days, isn't it?
Well, are we different from Germans and Kenyans, too?
Yeah, but in speaking of the difference between Americans and Jewish people, we have great pride in our country just like they do, but we don't view our land as sacred in itself.
Oh, I see what you mean by that. Yeah, they definitely have a right to feel that way.
Well, when someone threatens to take our land from us, we go to war. When someone threatens to take Israel's land, they go to holy war.
This is certainly true, but why don't you explain to our listeners why this difference is so?
Okay, well, first off, I'd like to just ask a question. Did God promise Christopher Columbus, Amerigo Vespucci, or Ferdinand Magellan, or whoever you believe discovered the Americas, that America would be his descendants? Did God tell them that?
No. In other words, did God ever claim that he'd be the God of America? No, he didn't, but he did make that promise to Abraham and his descendants, as we saw a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, so let's go to a familiar passage so we can examine it a little more closely. After his anointing by Samuel, then his victory over Goliath in 1 Samuel 16, 17, and 18, David spent a lot of time trying to escape the murderous rage of King Saul.
You know, from what it appears in Scripture, this went on for several years, didn't it?
It did, and during his time on the run, David had to flee into territory that was outside of the borders of Israel. One time, David found Saul in a vulnerable situation and could have killed him. And we read the following conversation in 1 Samuel 26. Verses 17, 18, and 19 says, And Saul knew David's voice and said, Is this thy voice, my son David? And David said, It is my voice, my lord, O king. And he said, Wherefore doeth my lord thus pursue after his servant? For what have I done, or what evil is in mine hand? Now therefore I pray thee, let my lord the king hear the words of his servant. If the Lord have stirred thee up against me, let him accept an offering. But if they be the children of men, cursed be they before the Lord. Now get this. For they have driven me out this day from abiding in the inheritance of the Lord, saying, Go serve other gods. Now, a lot of David's troubles and distress was that he had been driven away from abiding in the inheritance of the Lord.
So what does that mean?
Well, this inheritance speaks of the land of Israel. David equated being driven from the land of Israel with being told to go and serve other gods.
Okay, so how does that make sense to us today? How did David see being driven from Israel as being told to worship other gods?
Well, we have to understand how Israel views their land, and they view it as sacred because God gave them the land. It isn't that they just came and took the land from other people like has been said. They're called colonialists, but yet Israel was not colonialist in the sense that they just came to a land that was already founded and took over. They went into a land that God said, if you'll drive out the inhabitants, I'm going to give the land to you. They were on a mission from God. They were not just murderous people who were wanting to kill somebody to have land. They believed that God dwelt in Israel with his people. So to be cast out of Israel was the same as being driven away from the Lord.
Okay, so when they went into another land, they were under the domain of other gods, right?
Yes, and this inheritance language is the same as what we found back in Deuteronomy 32, verses 8 and 9, where Jacob, or Israel, is God's inheritance. Let me read that for you. When the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, their land, what he was going to give them, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. For the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is the lot of his inheritance. In other words, he gave the people the land, but he took the people to himself. We could look at it as a type of a trade. God gave Israel the land for them to serve him. This is part of the covenant that they were making one with another. Israel was to be given to God, and God gave them the land. If they pull away from God, God would take the land from them. All of this refers to the land and to the people that God took for himself. Let me read you another passage real quick. Deuteronomy 4 and 19 through 20. Unless thou lift up thine eyes unto heaven, and when thou seest the sun and the moon and the stars, even all the host of heaven, shouldest be driven to worship them and serve them, which the Lord thy God hath divided unto all nations under the whole heaven. But the Lord hath taken you and brought you forth out of the iron furnace, even out of Egypt, to be unto him a people of inheritance, as you are this day.
Well, was David ignorant of the fact that the God who made all the heavens and the whole earth can be found anywhere and everywhere?
Well, I doubt it, but in David's mind, to be driven outside of Israel meant not being able to worship the Lord, or at least not worshiping him properly, because to them, to worship God properly, you must worship him in the land of promise. And it's even best if you can do it at the temple or at the local synagogue, which is in Israel.
This is some of the reason they detested people from other lands, isn't it?
Yes. Now, please take special notice that David didn't complain of being driven away from the Ark of the Covenant. At that time, it was located at Kiriath Jearim in 1 Samuel 7:2. Nor did David complain of being driven away from the tabernacle. At that time, it was located at Nob, which is 1 Samuel chapters 21-22. You can find it along through there. That wasn't his complaint, being away from the Ark of the Covenant or being away from the tabernacle. His complaint was being driven from the Lord.
No, you're right, for his complaint was being expelled from the inheritance of the Lord.
Yes, and that can only mean one thing: the holy land of his God. David felt like that he couldn't worship like he ought to if he was not on holy ground.
Wow, that's a pretty powerful thought. If you're not living on holy ground, you have no right to worship.
Yeah, so could I preach a little holiness here for just a minute?
Go for it.
This is the biblical reason it's a sin to go to certain places. It's not holy ground. If it's not holy ground, God isn't there. If it's not holy ground and God's not there, then you can't worship God there.
Well, as Christians, we should stay away from any and all places that we can't worship the Lord. And I must say, this makes sense.
There are two reasons why Israel was considered as holy ground.
Two reasons? Okay, I must be missing something then.
Okay, well, number one, God gave Israel their land. And since God is holy, anything connected to God, therefore, must be holy by virtue. Number two, the Jews believe that all of the lands outside of Israel belong to other gods. Do you remember the captivity psalm?
Yeah, I think so. Are you talking of Psalms 137?
Yes, Psalm 137. As a matter of fact, I guess I'm going to go ahead and just read verse 1 down through 6, just to get some context here. I want you to listen closely to what is being said here. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down. Yea, we wept when we remembered Zion. We hanged our harps upon the willows in the midst thereof. For there they that carried us away captive required of us a song, and they that wasted us required of us mirth, saying, Sing us one of the songs of Zion. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. If I do not remember thee, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. If I prefer not Jerusalem above my chief joy. The writer of Psalm 137 explains why they had lost their song, why they had lost their joy. Did you happen to notice why?
Well, I believe so, because they had lost Jerusalem, Israel, and the promised land God had given them.
That's right. So the people said, hey, sing us a song. And they responded and said, how can we do that? We can't sing the Lord's song over here in this strange land. And so then they turned their heart to God and said, Lord, if I forget thee, if I forget Jerusalem, if I forget what you've done for us, then let my right hand forget her cunning. If I don't remember you, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. In other words, let me die for thirst. If I don't prefer Jerusalem above all other things, this meant everything to them. And so I want to look at another fascinating story that illustrates Israel's geographical worldview. We need to look into the story of Naaman, the commander of the army of Syria.
What in the world does Naaman have to do with the holy ground of Israel?
Well, Syria is a foreign country that's just beyond Israel's northern border. We all remember that Naaman was afflicted with leprosy. According to 2 Kings chapter 5, at the suggestion of a captive Israelite servant girl, Naaman decided to visit Elisha the prophet, hoping to be cured of his condition. He traveled all the way down to Israel, and he wanted to come see the man of God. But Elisha wouldn't even come out and talk to him in person.
That's right. For he sent his servant out to tell Naaman to go wash in the Jordan River or to dip 7 times if he wanted to be healed. Naaman resisted at first, but then he finally relented because of his servants.
That's right. He did as he was instructed, and he went, dipped, and he emerged from the waters totally cleansed from his disease. Here's what's so significant about this setting, though. We normally get caught up, excited about how Naaman was healed of leprosy and how God healed someone, and we need to get another dip, and let's dip 7 times if we have to. I understand the preaching points. I understand the power and the fervor in this, but we overlook something if we stop there. Here's what's so significant about the setting. Naaman returns to Elisha. He doesn't just get healed and go back to Syria. He comes back to Elisha, who this time chose to come out and speak with him.
Reckon why the man of God waited until after Naaman was healed to speak to him?
That's a good question, and I don't have a good clue other than one thing. You couldn't be around a leper. So the man of God obviously had been told by God before Naaman got there that a leprous man was coming to see him. And so he didn't come out and defile himself to be around someone with leprosy. 2 Kings chapter 5, though, I want to read verses 15 down through 19. Please listen closely at this interaction. And he returned to the man of God, he and all of his company, and came and stood before him. And he said, Behold, now I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. Now therefore I pray thee, take a blessing of thy servant. But he said, As the Lord liveth before whom I stand, I will receive none. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. And Naaman said, Shall there not then, I pray thee, be given to thy servant 2 mules burden of earth? For thy servant will henceforth offer neither burnt offering nor sacrifice unto other gods, but unto the Lord. In this thing the Lord pardon thy servant, that when my master goeth into the house of Rimmon to worship there, and he leaneth on my hand, and I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, when I bow myself down in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon thy servant in this thing. And he said unto him, Go in peace. So he departed from him a little way. I want you to take notice of several things here within this account. The brief trip into Israel and the encounter with Elisha had taught Naaman some really, really good theology.
Now, how do you know that? Are you just talking about his healing?
No, but he affirmed that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel. So even Naaman had got the idea that the real God lived in Israel, not outside of Israel.
Was he converting to Judaism by acknowledging this?
Well, some people would say yes, but I think he was simply proving that he was a believer in the one true God. Naaman said from here on out, he would only sacrifice to Israel's God.
Now, how could he keep that vow after returning to Syria, though? When he got back to Syria, Israel and her God would be a long ways from them.
That's right, and maybe so. But Naaman has the answer figured out. He asked for a couple of loads of dirt to take home with him.
Now, that was the weirdest part of all of this whole setting, if you ask me. Why in the world was he wanting to take dirt home with him?
Naaman viewed the land of Israel as holy ground now because he knew it was God's territory. So Naaman took as much dirt as his mules could carry so he would be able to spread some of the holy ground out from Israel to kneel down and worship the Lord on his own territory. He did this even though he lived in the territorial domain of the god Rimmon.
Wow. Did Naaman go home and spread the dirt out in his house?
We don't know. We don't know if he carried it around with him all the time so he could worship anywhere he desired. We're not told any of these things, but we do know this. He did take the dirt with him for the purpose of worship.
So what you're saying is that the fact that Naaman asked for the dirt in the first place, he was making a theological statement.
Absolutely, because dirt from Israel was the means by which Naaman was showing his faith that he would keep his vow to the one true God, the God of Israel.
Well, he truly believed the ground was holy in Israel then, didn't he?
Yes.
If he believed the ground to be holy, he also had to believe that God was truly in that land too.
Yes, he did. And Naaman saw the ground of Israel as holy because Israel's God showed himself real unto Naaman while he was there. So while we're on this topic of holy ground, do you remember why Jacob renamed the place that had been named Luz? He named it Bethel.
Yeah, because God made him there. This is also why Jacob considered it as a house of God. In Jacob's mind, this was holy ground.
Yeah, and this is why he promised God that if God would bring him back to that same spot, he would worship the Lord again. We find that in Genesis 28, verses 16 down through 22. And Jacob awaked out of his sleep, and he said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not. And he was afraid and said, How dreadful is this place? This is none other but the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. And Jacob rose up early in the morning and took the stone that he had put for his pillows and set it up for a pillar and poured oil upon the top of it. And he called the name of that place Bethel. But the name of that city was called Luz at the first. And Jacob vowed a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and raiment to put on, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then shall the Lord be my God. And this stone which I have set for a pillar shall be God's house. And of all thou shalt give me, I will surely give the tenth unto thee. All right here, he says, how dreadful is this place, for this is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Jacob had a vision of God. He awoke out of his sleep, and he realized, I'm on holy ground.
You know, it appears that we're starting to see a pattern through these scriptures for sure. In Genesis, Jacob meets God at Luz or Bethel and considers it holy ground. In Exodus, Moses met God in the burning bush on the backside of Midian, and God told Moses the ground where he was standing is holy ground.
That's right. So taking it farther, in the book of Joshua, Israel was about to start war with Jericho, and Joshua was paid a visit by the angel or the captain of the Lord's host.
Yeah, I remember that setting because the angel told Joshua that he was on holy ground.
That's right. So now we've got in Genesis and Exodus, and now we're in Joshua, and Joshua has holy ground, and now we move into 1 Samuel like we was looking at a little bit ago, and David connected the land of Israel with being holy ground. In 2 Kings, Naaman encountered Israel's God and realized he had just visited holy ground, and so he asked for some of the ground to take home with them.
All of this just so he could worship the one true God.
That's right. And we're going to be looking at some more of this later on. But right now we need to take a look back at where the principle of holy ground actually came from. We'll now examine something that will probably reshape how you even view the fall of man.
You think so? That's a pretty bold statement if you ask me.
I know it may seem to be a bold statement, but just bear with me because there's going to be some things that we're going to start looking at that really will make the rest of this make sense. The story of the fall of man in Genesis 3 seems pretty straightforward and easy to be understood, but that's probably because we've heard it so many times. The truth is, the passage actually presents a lot of interpretive questions.
Oh, boy, here we go again. What is so hard to understand about this?
Well, I believe it would do us good to examine one of the main characters that's found here in Genesis 3. And I'm not talking about Adam, and I'm not talking about Eve. I'm not even talking about God. I think it'd do us good to do an examination of the serpent. Once again, there's a lot more here than meets the eye.
Well, this should get interesting now. So what are some of your hard questions?
Well, one thing I've always wondered was this. Why wasn't Eve scared, or at least a little disturbed, when a serpent began speaking to her?
Do you reckon she'd become used to seeing it around the garden?
You know, I don't know. The Bible doesn't give us a lot of information about it, but there's no indication that she thought at all that this incident was unusual.
You know, some people explain this by saying years ago that certain animals could walk and talk.
I've heard that, but here's the thing. Could you also explain to me when this changed then? At what point did it all of a sudden cut off? I mean, I know I've heard some people say, well, when they were driven from the Garden of Eden. Well, when did it change?
Well, no, but some people have the idea that back then snakes had feet and legs.
I know, and I've heard that, and I'm not knocking people who believe this, but I do want to ask a few questions. If this is so, what gave it away that this was a serpent? If it was upright and it had feet and legs, how did they know it was a serpent? I mean, how do we know what a serpent is today? Well, they say, well, God cursed it and took away his legs, and after that, everybody knew that these were serpents. Let me ask you this. How would they have described a serpent back in those days so you would know what they were talking about?
Now, that I don't know.
And here's one of the definitions of a serpent. It's defined as a creature that slithers. So that makes it even more problematic. How could it slither when it had legs? Or was it only a serpent after it was cursed then? No, it was a serpent before it was cursed, because we know that because God cursed the serpent, and that was part of his curse. Something just doesn't quite add up in all of our thinkings about this. Both of these arguments make the assumption that this infamous villain was simply an animal.
So you don't believe it was an actual animal or snake?
I think it might be a little far-fetched to think that this was just only a snake. There's so much here that I want to talk about, and I know we're getting near the end of the episode, and I don't want to open up a can of worms or a can of snakes, pardon the pun. But I think it might be just a little too much of a stretch of the mind to just picture a snake that's standing there talking to somebody.
All right. We read of the parting of the Red Sea, Jonah and the whale, the 3 Hebrew children surviving the fiery furnace, and you believe that, don't you?
I do.
So why would you have a hard time believing this was a snake?
Okay, I believe all of what you said. But to read about a snake and a woman carrying on a conversation, it seems more than just a little strange. And I know everybody wants to talk about, well, what about Balaam and the donkey and all of that stuff? I don't have a problem with that, but the Bible says God opened the mouth of the donkey and he spoke. If you go to the New Testament, Peter says that God spoke through the donkey, and he called it a she-ass, and he said he spake with a man's voice. So God was speaking through the donkey to the prophet Balaam. Now, it never says that God spoke through the snake, because we know that there's somebody else speaking through the snake or serpent or whatever you want to call him. Before anyone accuses me of not believing the Bible, please hear me out.
Okay, what is your argument against this now?
For starters, the Bible never calls this figure a snake, but the serpent. Okay, it doesn't even say it's just a serpent. It says the serpent. The next thing I would say is this. Have you ever studied the words and their definitions from Genesis 3 or read any early Jewish writings and culture from 4000 to 200 BC? If you haven't dug into the meanings of the names and the words found within Genesis 3, how would you know what you should believe?
Well, I always thought it was very simple and straightforward.
Well, the truth is that the ancient readers would not have expected Eve to have been scared of the serpent. For one, she was in Eden with God and the counsel of the Elohim. They were used to being around other spirit beings, obviously. For the ancient Jews, I believe it would have been very clear to them that Eve was conversing with a divine being of some sort.
Well, I will admit I've wondered if the devil was a snake or just manifested as a snake. Some people actually believe, though, that Satan took possession of a snake, and this is how he spoke to her in the garden.
I understand that, and I know a lot of people preach about why they don't like snakes. They feel like that the devil was a serpent in the garden and that he took the form of a serpent, and that's why all snakes are evil and they need to be killed. And I'm not saying that we need to have snakes and keep them for pets, but here's the thing. If this is the case, though, we still haven't solved the problem of whether or not the serpent had legs or not, among other things, because we're trying to decide who or what it is. The Bible has already explained to us that Eve was on divine turf. Therefore, Adam and Eve were on holy ground.
Okay, I get that much, but in reality, how did this snake speak? Do you know?
Well, in the Near Eastern literature around the Old Testament era, animal speech was not uncommon. It was very common for people to write a book and depict animals as speaking. The context for such speaking is that of magic, though, which of course is tied to the world of the gods and even divination. For example, no Egyptian or no Israelite even would have presumed that animals that they saw in their everyday lives could talk. If they went out to plow in the field, they wouldn't think that their oxen could talk to them. They wouldn't think if they saw a bird flying overhead that it's going to tell them something. But when you read a book or see something depicted in a drawing of an animal speaking, it normally had some kind of evil or magical force that was in view, and a lot of the other gods were depicted as animals, and they spoke. I hope you can kind of see what's going on right here.
Well, I have read somewhere that animals were often the vehicle for manifesting divine presences or divine powers in stories.
You're right, because the kind of animal would often depend on characteristics associated with that animal or on the status of that animal in a culture's religion.
You mean such as cats in Egypt, cows in India, stuff like that, right?
Yeah, that's very correct. And believe it or not, the point of Genesis 3 is not to inform us about ancient zoology. It's not to inform us about a time when animals could talk. It's to tell us something much more important.
Yeah, I can go with that, but you still haven't really answered any of these questions we raised.
I know, and I think I'm going to wait and tackle them in an episode all by itself next week, Lord willing. Right now, though, allow me to go over some of the things we've already studied the past few weeks and build the case up to this point, and next week, Lord willing, we'll study on the serpent. The world that we live in was created by the Lord God. Human beings are his created representatives, and we carry or bear the image of God. Eden was where he placed man at. It's where he put man. And it was also God's earthly abode. When God would be on earth, he would be found in Eden. When he was there, that place was holy ground. Eden was so holy when man was driven out of it, he couldn't go back in. God put a cherubim with a flaming sword there to keep man out. It was so holy. God wasn't by himself, nor was man by himself. We know at least one other being was out there with them, and this being is called the serpent. I believe that God was accompanied by a supernatural host in Eden. I don't believe that wherever God goes, he goes by himself. I believe that the Trinity appears together. I believe that maybe even some of the angelic host goes with God wherever he is. One member of that divine host was not happy with God's decisions to create mankind and give him dominion.
Okay. Wait a minute. You just said something that blew my mind. Are you implying that the serpent was a member of God's divine council?
Well, let me ask you a question in return. Wouldn't you say that the devil is connected with the serpent?
Yes, but wow. I see what you've been getting at now.
All of this leads up to how humanity got into the mess that we're in. Now, let me throw a wrench into some of the people's theology and your theology. Most preachers, through the years, the way I've heard them preach, they place all of the blame of sin as being because we're in the flesh. And they say that it's our flesh that causes us to sin.
Are you saying there isn't?
No, I believe it's part of it, but that's mainly the only part that we hear about. They go on to say this is what happened in the Garden of Eden. Man sinned because he was in the flesh. They were sinless beings when God created them. In a technical sense, yes, that preaching is technically right, but there's some flaws in that theology if that's as far as we go. Man did sin because he was in the flesh. But what about spirit beings like the angels who were cast out? They sinned and they were not in the flesh. What do you do with that? All right, so these people, Adam and Eve, they were led away of their own lust, which is inherent in the flesh. But they were led away by temptation. That temptation came from a divine being. That temptation came from one that we would know as a Elohim.
Oh, I see how this factors into how we should understand theology. I wonder if some people might get a little antsy about you using divine when speaking of the devil or serpent.
Well, divine doesn't mean God or godlike. That's what most people believe it means. They think, well, when you talk about the divine, you're talking about God. Well, you can be. You can be. And it should be. When we talk about God, we're talking about a divine being. But any being that is eternal is divine. I mean, divine is simply another designation for an eternal being, one that's going to live forever. Elohim can mean God, but it can also mean an angel. It can be speaking of a lowercase g God. It can be talking about the devil or even a demon.
I do think you made a valid point just now, because we have already established that Elohim is a spirit being, which is eternal, which means they are divine being. So why do you feel they sinned?
The couple in the garden sinned because they lusted after the forbidden fruit that they were tempted to eat. They were tempted. They partook of what God said to abstain from, but it's because they were tempted by someone to eat it. The main reason is that they were lured to this point by an evil spirit being.
That makes sense, but I don't know. It's a little different than what most people are used to hearing. That includes myself.
Well, I understand. So allow me to ask you a question or two before we close.
All right.
Have you ever been around a snake?
Yeah.
Did the snake ever try to get you to disobey God or his commandments?
No, but I've never seen a snake that could talk.
Now you're starting to see things my way. There's something different about this serpent, and we're going to look at that next week, Lord willing.
All right. Good lesson. Friends, remember, if you have a Bible question or a question regarding how news and current events or things going on in our culture are connected to Scriptures, drop us an email at dkministries1977@yahoo.com. That's dkministries1977@yahoo.com. We hope you enjoyed this episode today, sharing God's Word. But until next time, may God bless you all.
Be sure and come back Monday, February the 26th for episode number 157. Who's your father?
He's done so much for me, this I know. Really changed my heart all around, put my feet back on the ground, got along. Now for heaven I want to go. I want to go. I want to go to that land where the milk and honey flow. Oh, I've heard of such a place. I can't go there by God's grace. Never seen it, but I know I want to go.